on the coldest night of October when the wind moved through the trees like a warning. Daniel Harper slipped something under his mother's pillow while she was sleeping. He stood there for a moment in the dark, staring at her fragile figure beneath the blanket. The room smelled faintly of lavender, just like it had for years. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from urgency, from love, from the heavy weight of something that had been growing inside him for too long. He stepped back quietly, his heart pounding, left the room without making a sound. Margaret Harper did not know that when she closed her eyes that night, her life was about to change for months. Margaret had been drifting through her days like a ghost in her own home in Portland, Oregon. Since her husband Robert had died 2 years earlier, the house had felt too large, too quiet, too full of memories. She still set the dinner table for two sometimes. She still caught herself turning to speak to him when something funny happened. On television, Neil noticed everything. At 28, he had moved back home after a painful breakup in Seattle. He told everyone it was to help his mother. But the truth was more complicated. He had felt lost. His engagement had fallen apart. His career in marketing had stalled. The future he had imagined disappeared in one terrible phone call. Coming home had been easier than explaining his heartbreak. At first, living together again felt awkward. They walked around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a space. But slowly, they found a rhythm. Morning coffee together, quiet dinners, old movies on Sundays. Margaret laughed more when Daniel was around. The house felt alive again, still. Something in her eyes remained distant. She often stared at Robert's old armchair as if waiting for him to return. Daniel saw how loneliness wrapped around her like a shadow. He hated that shadow 3 weeks earlier. Daniel had overheard something that changed everything. He was coming down the hallway when he heard his mother on the phone with her sister. "Linda, in Chicago. I don't know how much longer I can do this," Margaret had whispered. "Some days I don't even get out of bed. Daniel thinks I'm fine, but I'm not. I feel empty, Linda, completely empty." Daniel had frozen. He had never heard her speak like that. She was always the strong one, the steady one, the woman who held the family together when Robert's business struggled. The one who comforted Daniel after every childhood failure. Hearing that softness, that quiet despair, shook him deeply. That night he couldn't sleep. He realized that while he had been focused on his own broken dreams, he had missed how deeply his mother was hurting. She wasn't just lonely. She was slipping away from herself. The next day he made a decision. Daniel began reaching out to people quietly. He called an old friend of his father's, Thomas Reed, who still lived nearby. Thomas had been close to Robert for decades. He had lost his own wife 5 years earlier. They met for coffee at a small cafe downtown. "She needs something to look forward to," Daniel said, stirring his untouched drink. "She needs connection." Thomas nodded slowly. Grief can build walls, but walls can come down. Daniel didn't fully know what he was doing. He only knew he couldn't stand by and watch his mother fade. Over the next few days, he began working on something secret. Something bold. Margaret had always loved writing. When Daniel was a child, she wrote short romantic stories and kept them in a leather notebook. She had stopped after Robert died, said she had nothing left to say. Daniel found that notebook one afternoon while cleaning the attic. The pages were filled with passion and hope, with women who found love in unexpected places, with second chances. He sat on the attic floor and read until his chest tightened. She had once believed in new beginnings. That night, he opened his laptop and began typing. It wasn't easy. He wasn't a writer, but he poured himself into it. He wrote a long letter to her, not from him as her son, but from someone else, from a stranger who had noticed her strength, her kindness, her quiet beauty, someone who saw her not as a widow, but as a woman still alive. He kept it simple and honest. He wrote about second chances, about how life doesn't end at 55. about how the heart can open again. He signed it anonymously. 4 days, he questioned himself. Was this foolish? Was it wrong? Would she be angry? But he remembered her voice on the phone. I feel empty, so on that cold October night, he slipped the letter under her pillow. The next morning, Margaret woke before sunrise. She reached beneath her pillow to adjust it and felt something crisp, confused. She pulled out the envelope. Her name was written on the front in careful handwriting. Her heart skipped. She sat up slowly, staring at it. Daniel was still asleep. The house was silent. With trembling fingers, she opened it as she read. Her breathing changed. The letter spoke of quiet admiration, of noticing how she still watered her roses even when it rained, of seeing how she helped neighbors without asking for praise, of believing she deserved joy again. Tears slipped down her face before she realized she was crying. No one had looked at her that way in years. When she finished, she pressed the paper to her chest. She didn't know who wrote it. She didn't understand how it appeared. But for the first time in a long time, her heart felt something other than sorrow, hope, at breakfast. Daniel noticed the difference immediately. She moved lightly. There was color in her cheeks. She hummed softly while pouring coffee. Sleep okay? He asked carefully. She smiled in a way he hadn't seen since before his father died. Actually, yes. He nodded, pretending not to notice the folded letter tucked into her sweater pocket. Throughout the day, Margaret read it 3 more times. She looked out the window more. She brushed her hair carefully before going to the grocery store. She caught her reflection and didn't immediately look away. That evening, she called her sister. Something strange happened, she said softly. Linda listened closely as Margaret described the letter. Do you think it's from someone you know? Linda asked. Margaret hesitated. I don't know. But whoever wrote it sees me. That night she placed the letter back under her pillow. Daniel lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. He felt guilty for the deception, but he also felt relief. He had given her something she had lost. The next day, second envelope appeared on the kitchen table. Margaret gasped when she saw it. Daniel watched from the doorway as she opened it, with shaking hands. This letter spoke of courage, of stepping outside comfort zones, of meeting someone for coffee without fear. It suggested a simple thing. Saturday afternoon at Riverside Park. Bench near the old oak tree. Margaret's pulse raced. Was this madness? Was she foolish to even consider it? Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't expected her to look so nervous, so vulnerable, Mom. He said gently, Everything okay? She looked at him, searching his face as if he might hold answers. I think someone wants to meet me. He forced a small smile. That's interesting. Her eyes filled with uncertainty. What if it's a joke? What if it's cruel? He stepped closer. What if it's not? Silence stretched between them. Saturday was 3 days away. Those 3 days felt endless. Margaret stood in front of her closet longer than she had in years. She tried on dresses she hadn't worn since. Robert was alive. She brushed dust off old heels. She even bought new lipstick. Daniel watched quietly, stomach twisting. He hadn't planned this far. On Saturday morning, rain clouds gathered over Portland. The sky looked uncertain, just like Margaret felt. She stood at the front door, coat in hand. I might just go for a walk, she said casually. Daniel nodded. Good idea. As she stepped outside, he felt a wave of panic. What if she was disappointed? What if no one was there? What if he had pushed her too far? Margaret walked slowly toward Riverside Park. Each step felt heavier than the last. Heart pounded loudly in her ears when she reached the old oak tree. She stopped. The bench was empty. For a moment, her shoulders dropped. A familiar sadness began to creep back in. Then she saw him, a man standing a few feet away, holding a single white rose. Thomas Reed, her breath caught. He stepped forward gently. Margaret. She stared at him in shock. Thomas. He gave a soft smile. I hope this isn't too bold. Her mind raced. Thomas had been Robert's friend for years. Kind, steady, quiet. You wrote the letters? She asked. He hesitated only a second. With a little encouragement, she looked confused. Encouragement. Before he could answer, Daniel stepped. Out from behind a nearby tree, her eyes widened. Daniel, she whispered. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't watch you hurt anymore. Understanding dawned slowly across her face. The letters, the timing, the caredot tears filled her eyes. But not from anger. You did this? She asked. He nodded. I just wanted you to remember who you are. Thomas stepped closer. The words were true, Margaret. Every one of them. Rain began to fall lightly around them. Margaret looked between the two men. Her son, desperate to save her from loneliness. Her old friend, brave enough to step forward. Her heart felt full and fragile at the same time. She had come expecting a stranger. Instead, she found something far more complicated. And as the rain grew heavier, she realized this meeting was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Margaret stood in the light rain, frozen between the two men. Her coat was damp, her hair sticking to her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. Everything felt sharp and alive, as though the world had finally turned a corner she had been waiting for, though she didn't know it existed. She looked first at Thomas, his calm, steady eyes meeting hers, and then at Daniel, her son, whose nervousness betrayed a depth of love she hadn't realized before. Mom. Daniel began, his voice breaking. Slightly, I couldn't let you be alone anymore. You deserved more than this quiet, this emptiness. He swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. I wanted you to feel seen. Really seen? Margaret's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to find the words, but the combination of rain, surprise, and emotion left her breathless. She looked down at the wet ground, at the fallen leaves, and then back up at them. Thomas shifted slightly, the rose in his hand trembling. I didn't expect her to come out in the rain, Kay said softly, glancing between mother and son. I wanted to give her a chance. A reason to remember life isn't over. That it can still be beautiful. Margaret's lips quivered. You wrote all the letters? She asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas nodded, his gaze steady. With Daniel's encouragement, he told me stories about you, things only he would notice. I just put them into words. Daniel looked down at the ground, embarrassed. I didn't know how else to do it. I just knew. I couldn't watch you fade away. Margaret's eyes welled up. She had felt so lonely, so lost for so long, and suddenly everything was colliding in front of her. Her son, protective, daring, desperate to help her. Thomas, tender, patient, a man who had known her heart for years. She felt warmth creeping back into the spaces she thought were forever cold. Margaret swallowed, her voice thick. I don't know what to say. Thomas smiled gently. Then don't say anything. Just let the moment be. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, hope and fear mingling. He wanted her to understand that this had all come from love, from care, from wanting her happiness, but he also feared she might be angry, overwhelmed, or even resentful. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment and inhaled. The rain smelled like fall, fresh and clean, and her heart thumped wildly. She realized she hadn't felt alive like this in years. She hadn't felt seen, noticed, or cherished in a long time. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was sudden, but something inside her stirred, demanding she respond. She opened her eyes and looked at Daniel. You did this all for me? He nodded, his mouth tight, his fingers clenched at his sides. Yes, I wanted you to feel alive again. Margaret turned to Thomas, still holding the rose. And you wrote the letters? I did, Thomas said softly. But the words were yours. Really? They were inspired by everything Daniel told me. Everything you've always been. Margaret's lips trembled into a small smile. She could feel tears brimming, but they weren't the same as before. These were tears of hope, possibility, something she had believed was lost forever. Daniel shifted his weight nervously. There's more. I thought maybe, Kay, you could give yourself a chance. You deserve it. Margaret's heart raced. She had spent years protecting Daniel, guiding him, worrying for him. Never had she considered that he might be thinking of her happiness too. The realization hit her with a mix of pride and disbelief. Thomas stepped closer, still careful, still respectful. Margaret, you've carried so much. You've been strong always. But strength doesn't mean you can't accept kindness or love or joy. You deserve all of it. Margaret's breath caught. The truth in his words was undeniable. For so long she had lived in the shadows of grief, of routine, of duty. But standing here in the rain, she realized that maybe she didn't have to. Anymore. She glanced back at Daniel. His face was earnest, open, vulnerable. He'd risked embarrassment, misunderstanding, even anger to give her this. She could see how much he cared, how much he had grown, how much he wanted her to have happiness. A gust of wind blew through the park, shaking leaves from the trees and scattering them around their feet. Margaret shivered but smiled. You've shown me something I forgot existed, she whispered. I feel alive again. Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. Relief washed over him. That's all I wanted. Thomas handed her the rose. Sometimes a single gesture can remind us of what we've been missing, he said. Sometimes it takes others to help us see it. Margaret took the rose, pressing it to her chest. She felt the weight of her grief and loneliness, but she also felt the lightness of possibility. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe life had more to offer than she had dared hope. For the next hour they walked through the park together. Rain pattered softly around them, but it felt like a gentle blessing rather than a nuisance. Margaret laughed softly at Thomas's dry humor. And Daniel shared stories from his childhood, the memories making them all smile as the sun broke through clouds. Painting the park in golden light, Margaret realized that she hadn't been this happy in years. She looked at Thomas, and a warmth spread through her chest. She looked at Daniel, and pride and gratitude mingled in her heart. The day passed quickly. They returned to the house, damp but glowing. Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. She could reclaim her life, her joy, her laughter. She could accept kindness, allow herself to be seen, and even open her heart to new possibilities. Over the next few weeks, things changed. Margaret began writing again, small notes to herself, short stories, little reminders of hope and love. Daniel continued to be attentive but gave her space, letting her rediscover herself. Thomas became a frequent visitor, a gentle presence in her life. Always careful to respect boundaries, always patient. Margaret found herself looking forward to their visits, the conversations, the quiet moments in the garden, the shared cups of tea on rainy afternoons. Her laughter returned naturally, and the house felt alive again. One evening, they watched the sun set over the city from the front porch. Thomas turned to her. "You've changed," he said softly. Margaret smiled, feeling the truth of it. "I have. I feel lighter. I feel lighter. I feel alive." Daniel watched from nearby, a small smile on his face. He knew he had helped her, guided her gently, but he also realized something important. Happiness wasn't something he could give her. She had to claim it herself. And she was doing just that as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The past still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She had hope, friendship, love, and the chance to rediscover herself. The letters, the rose, the courage to step outside her comfort zone. It had all led her here. And she knew without a doubt that life still held surprises. That night, as she placed a journal beside her bed, she smiled at Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of warmth and emotion. He nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. "You're welcome, Mom." Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the softness of hope and love settle around her like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, she slept without worry, without grief pressing on her chest, and as she drifted into dreams, she knew that tomorrow and the days after would be full of possibility, full of moments that could heal, inspire, and bring unexpected joy. Life was starting again, and this time, she would embrace it fully. The rain had passed, but its memory lingered in the air. It's a reminder that even storms end, leaving behind clarity, growth, and beauty. And Margaret Harper, once lost in her own grief, finally found her way back to herself. The story wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun.